Welcome, everybody, to CommPartners Conversations. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Kendra Matarozza, and I'm the Director of Online Events with CommPartners. So for those that may be joining us for the first time today, the goal of our CommPartners Conversations is to just have a casual conversation with other professionals that share the association space with us, talking about various insights, trends, and tips and tricks to help you kind of formulate your program within your association. One little housekeeping note, if anybody has questions or thoughts on the program, please be sure to post them below. We welcome any thoughts, questions, ideas, anything to help the conversation flow. I'd also like everyone that is joining us, invite you to let us know where you're joining us from, your organization, your location, any information that you can share to make this conversation go a little bit more smoothly. And for now, I'd like to introduce our guest that is joining us today. We are super excited to have Mallory Gott, founder and creative director of GNA. Welcome. And I'll just do a quick little bio about Mallory. For more than 15 years, Mallory, who's the founder and creative director of GNA, an experiential design firm, has traveled the globe designing amazing experiences for people from all walks of life and across a breadth of industries and specialties, from product and brand repositioning to customer acquisition to organizational cultural restructuring. She helps for and not for-profit clients apply GNA's proprietary design thinking framework to discover solutions to their seemingly unsolvable problems. So welcome, Mallory. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Great. So we've got about 20 minutes, so you and I are just going to dive right in. And also worth noting, too, you are a former association girl. So a lot of the challenges or, experiences that some of our viewers may be are experiencing or facing, you're very much familiar, and you're able to turn your expertise into, your past experiences into kind of helping lay the groundwork. So let's start off. I think everybody kind of knows the concept. What is experiential design? Kind of just as a big, broad spectrum. Can you give us your insight on that?
I would be happy to. And good morning or good afternoon to everybody that's joining us, or good evening, depending on where you're checking in from. Thank you for spending a little time with us today. So experiential design, in my opinion, is often a lot broader than what I think most people understand it to be at first blush, especially in the association community, but also in some for-profit sectors as well. What I often come across is people thinking of experiential design as the design of physical experiences that are finite in duration. So things like, before everything that happened with the pandemic, certainly conferences, launch parties, social events, galas, things like that. But now transitioning into the same virtual kind of counterparts of those things as experiences to be designed in, as I said, in a finite duration. And even more so, they tend to think of that experiential design in terms of the aesthetic design. So things that are flashy, things that are aesthetically beautiful, and that certainly is a component. However, when we look at experiential design, one of the things I stepped back and did was actually just open up a dictionary and look at the definition of an experience. And it is anything that you can observe or interact with. And that seems really broad to the point of almost being unhelpfully vague. However, what it opens up is the space for us to consider a lot of different touch points that generally aren't thought of as part of an experience. And so as GNA looks at how we design experiences, we often consider things that go far beyond what are, in the case of virtual events, thought of as the principal components of designing the experience. What are the sessions? How do we structure content? What is our software system registration? But we'll step back even further and look at how are the policies that we're using, affecting the experience one way or another? How is the tone of the language? How are the ways that we're preparing the people that are going to be contributing content, the ways that we're asking questions about people's impressions, the ways that we are even interacting with them in terms of social interaction? So is that, are we saying we want something to be really engaging and exciting and welcoming, but then what we're producing, and maybe not through any intentional fault of our own, but, is kind of a flat networking, like, hey, come into a Zoom room and you will just have, good luck talking. We're not really sure. We'll give you some prompt questions, but it doesn't feel exciting. It doesn't, whatever. So all of that to say that from our perspective, and the definition of an experience is anything that you can observe or interact with. Experiential design is really looking at all of those touch points and how we line all of them up in front of the camera, so to speak, and behind it to design one cohesive and comprehensive experience from end to end, whatever those starting and end points are.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you. And it was interesting as you were chatting, I think you and I have very parallel lives. So as you're talking, I'm more on the production side. So I'm thinking, okay, we got to get that language right. We have to get those emails. All of that, of course, I think with, this year kind of wrapping up, those things are wonderful with the gift of time, which a lot of us have found ourselves very quickly losing out on this year, just needing to react. So, based on your experience, how should that influence the virtual design, especially because many of our associations found themselves, in that position this year, having goals, things that needed to get done, and then, with half the time, exactly, so what would you say, why does that need to, and how does that need to influence, as they're thinking or conceptualizing their events?
Yeah, that's a great question, and certainly one that we tackle because, as you mentioned, I have lived in the association world. I've created and designed and produced events for associations, and I'm acutely aware that all of the theory and the ephemeral ideas are wonderful, but if I can't actually bring it to market and I can't do it in a realistic way, it's not going to work. And so one of the things that we also work a lot with people on is when we build experiential design plans, using what we call an eye-to-eye ratio, impact to investment. And, this is not rocket science in the sense that people don't understand the idea of low-hanging fruit. However, where we start to differentiate is we look at what is going to have the largest impact for the lowest level of investment based on the feelings that are at the core of a group's experiential design plan. And to touch just very momentarily on that, because it's really important, but I know it's a bit tangential to the question you asked. What is at the core of the way we design experiences when we look at all those touch points and then we prioritize them in that eye-to-eye ratio and start working through what can we realistically focus on to develop a better experience, is all centered around how we want an experience to feel. So the idea is that, yes, analytics are fantastic. They're necessary. You're not going to just be able to, love an event into existence. But you also can have, at times, people unintentionally working against each other when their priorities are different. And if we understand that the experience we're trying to create should evoke feelings of, let's say, just to continue the example, excitement, or, we want it to feel electrifying or really stimulating. Then as we look at those low-hanging fruit ideas, email marketing, for example, or speaker preparation, how do we infuse, even if it's in a quick, rapid way because we're up against a time crunch, how do we infuse feelings that will, or actions that will evoke those feelings? How do we look at this thing that we've got to do anyway and say, even moving the needle slightly towards creating more of these feelings of excitement or stimulation or electrifying, whatever you end up choosing, how can we do that in the time that's allocated? And that's where I believe, and I've seen it work really well, that impact to investment ratio coupled with the feelings-led approach can help people no matter how much time they do or don't have, no matter how many staff they do or don't have, because it gives you a real formulaic method to start making very discernible change in the way that you're designing whatever experience you've got to design.
Right. Now, it's interesting as you're chatting, obviously the past year, I think that, ourselves as well with the volume of events that come on and the people in the association as well, it almost seems like you're drinking from a fire hose, you're standing at this, mountain looking up at what you need to do. Mm-hmm. But it sounds like what you're talking about is kind of similar to, event production as well, where you're just really kind of taking these concepts and then breaking them down. So I think it's difficult for people to even, figure out where they need to start. But it sounds like you guys are really kind of gearing in on, that feelings vibe and, kind of designing things around that. And then everything else kind of falls into place the way it does with regular, live events. The feeling versus thinking, that's a very interesting, concept that you guys, very strongly believe in, and design a lot of framework on, designing these programs for associations. Can you chat a little bit about that exactly, like what that looks like, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. You provided a wonderful segue, and I don't even know if you intended to do it, but the reason that we talk so much about feelings is because feelings are universal. So if I ask someone, most adults, and frankly, most kids, if they understand what the feeling of love is, there's no definition that has to be put behind that. Now, obviously, that's an extreme example. But what I mean by that is that when you shared, a lot of us have felt like, and rightfully so, we're drinking from a fire hose and we don't even know where to start. The beautiful thing about a feelings-led approach to designing an experience is that even if we start by defining the experience as, in this case, a virtual event, so we're thinking about what are those conventional large-scale touch points that most of us would look at first. If we understand how we want that experience to feel overall, we can apply that same feelings-led approach to even our experience of putting that together. So instead of looking at or looking up at what feels like, a fire hose worth of work and decisions that are coming down at me, and having one idea of, I have to design this experience that feels like, excitement, but I feel like I'm overwhelmed, I can step back and say, okay, how do I infuse excitement into my own experience of actually producing this event on a very tactical level? These are the tasks that I have to do today, or these are the decisions that I've got to make. How do I bring some sense of excitement into the experience of that piece of the design as well? And people will at first, think about that and say, that's almost not important. I need to design the event. I don't need to design my experience. But what we talk about so frequently with folks is that it becomes almost impossible to design an experience around a set of feelings that you have not felt about that experience at any point along the way. And I've seen that hold true for people who are content experts, for people who are technical, production experts, for people who are meeting planners. Even when we were doing place-based events, if you have a contentious relationship with someone like a convention services manager or a hotelier, and then you want to get on site and have that be like upbeat and exciting and fun, that's really going to be tough to translate. So the reason that we feel so confident in a feelings-led approach is because it is a very, very simple litmus test that helps anyone at any point in the process really quickly identify, am I doing things in a way that create more of these feelings or fewer of them? Whether it's the actual day of the event and you're running it, or you're looking at, how do I make budget cuts because our registration numbers haven't hit where they need to? How do I bring some levity or some satisfaction or contentment or friendliness? And that may sound odd at first, but when we step back and look at it, there are simple ways that allow us to do it. And when we bring, as I said, when we bring a design thinking approach into all of these different components of the experience along the way, we're so much better positioned to actually deliver an end product to our customers that creates those feelings for them as well.
Right. Now, as you're chatting too, a live example I think that probably many that are viewing can probably relate to is, when COVID hit, it was pretty much in the midst of big convention season. So we've got all of our associations who make the majority of their revenue at these events, suddenly needing to totally redesign them and make them virtual. And I think one thing that we learned here too, it's you can't take a live in-person event and then just pop it online. It doesn't necessarily lend itself to be totally effective for your viewers. Does it make sense to have them sit for 8 hours at a computer screen when, on site they'd have the vibrancy of the event and they'd be able to, network, of course. So what are some of the challenges, or I guess some of the things that you've worked with your clients, some of the big, points to drive home about what needs to be considered? Why should this live event be different, this virtual event be different than the live on-site event? Like, what are what are some main characteristics, I guess, that you try to get them to focus on?
Yeah, well, I would say if I were to categorize it as a top 3 hit list, one of the number one with a bullet for me, not surprisingly, would be understand how you want the experience to feel first. before you make any operational decisions or you really sink into this is the format, this is the structure. Because just to use a quick real world example that we're working on now with an association, a healthcare association, they are producing a virtual event that is replacing a place-based event. It's actually focused not on their membership, it's focused on patient base. So they're a healthcare organization. And when we started to look at how they wanted that event to feel, one of the things that surfaced immediately was that they wanted to evoke feelings of self-confidence and empowerment because they're trying to convey information to people who are in vulnerable populations about how they can manage their own health. And so when we took those feelings and we looked at those as the basis for different touch points in the design of that experience, what it opened up for us were things like, we need to create a registration process that is exceedingly simple. If I don't feel self-confident in how I access registration and move through it because it's quick and easy, the likelihood that I'm going to engage goes down. We need to create delivery mechanisms that I, without any additional technical knowledge, if all I'm using is a phone, in this case, is it's likely that that's the large majority of this group, what am I comfortable accessing because I've seen it in other systems? Not navigating through building a whole schedule, not navigating through how to log in and start chatting on my phone. This needs to, all of these different touch points, not just the content itself, needs to evoke these feelings of self-confidence and empowerment and so on and so forth. So that would be my absolutely first hit list item. Understand how you want the experience to feel and then design touch points accordingly. Second would be kind of hot on the heels of that, look at upending the problem altogether. So understandably in March, when it became apparent place-based events were no longer on the table for the foreseeable future, the first wave of action was to try to replace those in a virtual context. At this point, though, stepping back and looking at not how do we make people think that this virtual event is going to replicate our annual conference, but how do we look at delivering whatever this experience is in a virtual environment and disregard entirely what we've done in a place-based event? Because they're different. They may serve a similar purpose, but they're different. And when we start from the place of solving the, how do I translate A to B, we're kind of already behind the 8 ball because we put so many strictures and rigid guidelines on ourselves. So step away from that, step back from, and give yourself a little space from, this is how we've done it in place-based, and let's just overlay that on top of virtual. And the third component, and I really think this is important, and I know it's a bit avant-garde for people, it feels a little awkward, is really think again about how you want to design the experience of producing this for yourselves as the people responsible for creating the content, the delivery, the marketing, etc. And I say that because of what I said just a few minutes ago. If I constantly feel like every time I get on a planning call, everyone is frustrated, everyone feels tired, there's not clarity, it's going to be difficult for me to put on a completely different affect and translate that into something great for my volunteer committees who are producing content, or the members, or the consumers who are coming into the event. So again, when we start with the feelings as the first hit list item, we then look at a problem differently. That leaves the third option right there available for us, which is the different problem might also include how to create a better experience for us as a team producing something so that we can in turn better serve the people who are going to consume it.
Right. As you're chatting, it's been a learning experience for everyone. So it's interesting to hear your side where you're really coming from, the feeling, the whole concept. And also kind of when we're designing these virtual events too, more on the production side, similarly, we have to think about the whole picture and then how to segment it. And it's, when you're chatting about the registration and, making sure that's super easy for someone that may have tech challenges, it's a lot. It's a lot to take on. And I think, people are starting to see that more, but it's really need to put some thought process into it, and we don't have the benefit of that in-person face-to-face. So pretty much all communication that you're having with your end users, it's not happening on site. It's happening through the site. You're, sending them emails, all of that stuff needs to be very lined out, kind of really make sure that it flows freely for them so that they're able to attend and understand everything. So a lot of similarities that I'm definitely seeing. And to your point, lots of growing pains, lots of, assessment, finding out what works, what can work better for next year.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess one thing too, we are kind of coming to the end of our little time here, but next year, there's still going to be some uncertainty, at least definitely in the first half. So, you had chatted about making, events dynamic and, what is that feeling? What is that vibe that you want to convey in your event? What are, I guess, some of the top things? Because, to your point too, you want to make this dynamic. If you want to make sure, if you want your event to kind of have a certain vibe, that feeling, you want to make sure that's pulling throughout all communication aspects and through the site as well. Mm-hmm. So what are some ways, or I guess two things to think about as we kind of wrap up for those associations, people that are just making it day by day, they're wearing many hats, trying to, plan in a very uncertain time. What are some ways, or what should they be focusing on to kind of reinvigorate their online programs and their online offerings?
Yeah. So, I know everyone's at different places with the latitude they feel that they have to do innovation on a variety of scales. An exercise that I often take people through, whether it results in a complete overhaul of a program or simply just an improvement in the way I feel about what I'm going to be doing with what I already have, is to suspend any idea of what you think something has to be for a short duration of time. And to write down, and we usually start, here, or pretty close approximation of this with teams that we work with. What exactly would it be? And really, and as soon as we see, when we do this with people and we facilitate it, but it's certainly feasible for someone to do it on their own as well. As soon as we see people starting to discredit or discount why something isn't possible, oh, the members won't like it, this will never fly, our sponsors, that is the immediate point at which we often ask people to pause and just lay that down for a minute and keep focusing on what the experience would be if it really was the dream version of the experience that they got to create. For the simple reason that even when we have to look at the reality and the pragmatic, restrictions that are often available or often placed upon certain design projects, we can still say, if our dream experience is this, and we know we have these other things to contend with, how do we start to move the needle? How do we start to infuse, or solve a problem more creatively so that we're getting closer to that dream experience? If we have sponsors who feel really strongly that they want certain benefits, could we step back? And I know this sounds simplistic, but it often does get overlooked. Could we step back and talk to a couple of them and ask them, what's the experience you're hoping to have? Because they may have fallen into that same hamster wheel of, I need banners, I need, 15-minute intro, I need a walk inside. Okay, well, let's talk about what are you really trying to create here? There may be a different solution that gives us a different feel for this, without having to completely upend an event if that's not realistic for a group at a given period of time. The second thing I would say, and I probably sound a bit like a broken record, but it's because I think it's very, it's a really important solution and it works, is as you're facing uncertainty and there are, points at which you have to either turn left or right, or contingency plans, or whatever that looks like. That contingency planning in and of itself is a part of the experience that can be designed as well in such a way that you can create more or fewer of the feelings that you're looking for. So if there's something like, I want to create a stronger sense of security or stability in my contingency planning, how do I do that? Knowing that I won't be able to make all the decisions I need to make at any point. I mean, pandemic or no, there's always a high degree of uncertainty, but how do I infuse that in a very incremental way so that all of those smaller increments are in and of themselves creating in the aggregate a much stronger sense of security and stability. And I could elaborate on that more. I want to be respectful of time, but I do think that as much as any decision in and of itself helps to design a different experience for people as they move through whatever the next 6 to 12 months is going to look like.
No, that's great. And I loved your point about talking to the members. We can sit and guess and, assume things about, the membership base, but really sometimes it is as simple as just reaching out and really understanding what they want as well. At the end, there may be credits, something everybody needs, but there's different ways to get there, and there's different ways to make it more enjoyable. And it sounds like you bring a wealth of information and experience with that. So thank you so much for joining us, Mallory. I do appreciate your time today.
Absolutely. And I know that we have a couple of things that we did about 2 weeks ago. There's a recorded blog and a recorded webinar, and a blog, which elaborates on this information a lot more thoroughly. And I know that we're looking at early January or early 2021 to roll out a course that's going to be available that will help people move through this design thinking framework themselves. And we're doing that in conjunction with CommPartners. So I would love for people who are interested to check those resources out, contact me or contact the CommPartners folks. But I love this stuff. And when I get to bring it to people, it's really, really a joy for me to watch people change the experiences that they're having for themselves and for their organizations. So any opportunities to do that are always great for me.
Great. Thank you. And it's, as we were chatting, it's intimidating, but, you're able to break it down. Same with us on our side as well, to kind of make things a little more digestible. So again, thank you so much. We certainly look forward to collaborating with you further. And want to thank everybody for joining us today as well. We hope you'll stay tuned. We'll be announcing our next guests for the 2021 series of Conversations with CommPartners. And also, if you would like to pop in the comment section, please let us know what type of topics, other things you'd like to discuss. So we want to make sure this time is valuable for you all. But again, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.
My pleasure. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Mallory.